Today we're going to be covering asymmetrical balance within the principles of design. While the elements of art are what artists use to make art, the principles of design are what artists use to make art pretty. Today we're going to be covering the first principle of design, and actually the first part of the principle of design, which is balance, because balance refers to how visually weighted an object is. You can imagine this kind of like a scale. For instance, if you have a large square on one half of the artwork, and then a tiny circle on the other half of the artwork, it's not going to be visually balanced because one side is going to look visually heavier than the other. Balance makes sure that all of those things are in equilibrium so it doesn't look offset. There's actually three different types of balances, and we're going to be covering one of them today. The one we're covering today is asymmetrical balance. An asymmetrical balance means that if you draw an imaginary line down the center of the artwork,
imagination,
then the left-hand side is different than the right-hand side. If we look at Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, you can see that there are different things going on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. However, if you divide a line down the middle and break everything down into its own little section, you can see that while there's different things going on, they're still balanced based on weight. This is an anime rendition of How to Train Your Dragon, and if you can imagine a line going down the center of the artwork, you can see that the left-hand side of the artwork, where you have Astrid and Toothless Face, is different than the right-hand side of the artwork where you have Hiccup. Now, even though Astrid only takes up a quarter of the artwork while Hiccup takes up half of the artwork, it is balanced out because above Astrid's head is the How to Train Your Dragon logo in Japanese. And that's asymmetrical balance. Pretty much different things on the left-hand side of the artwork than the right-hand side of the artwork. Your assignment for today, you're going to be creating your very own artwork that shows off the principle of design for asymmetrical balance. You can look up references online. Perfectly fine with that. You are not allowed to copy your neighbor, so you need to come up with your own ideas that is different from them. Don't steal something that you find online. Make it your own. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy this lesson. If you did, let me know, and I'll see you in the next video. Today we're going to be covering symmetrical balance within the principles of design. While the elements of art are what artists use to make art, the principles of design are what artists use to make art pretty. Today, we're going to be covering the first principle of design, which is balance, because balance refers to how visually weighted an object is. You can imagine this kind of like a scale. For instance, if you have a large square on one half of the artwork, and then a tiny circle on the other half of the artwork, it's not going to be visually balanced because one side is going to look visually heavier than the other. There's actually three different types of balances, and we're going to be covering one of them today. While asymmetrical balance meant that the left-hand side of an artwork was different than the right-hand side of an artwork, symmetrical balance, on the other hand, means that it is a mirror image on either side. You see this a lot in architecture because it makes it more secure structurally to have it be a mirror image on either side, so you have an equal balance of weight distribution. Symmetrical balance means that if you draw a line down the center of an artwork, it is identical on the left-hand side than the right, or at least close enough to identical, because there's always going to be that one person that says, oh no, the bridge right there has a bird on one side than the other. It doesn't matter. It's symmetrical. It's the same thing with the Taj Mahal. Yes, one tree is larger than the other on the left-hand side than the right. It doesn't matter. It's symmetrical for the most part. So symmetrical balance means that whenever you draw a line down the center of an image, it is identical on the left-hand side than the right, or at least close enough to identical that it could basically be the same thing. Your all's assignment for today, you're going to be creating your very own symmetrical artwork. Now, you can look up references online if you choose, but you'll have the remainder of the day to create your very own artwork that is an example of symmetry, or symmetrical balance. You are not allowed to copy your neighbor. You are allowed to look up references, but you're also not allowed to steal those references. So please make sure that you use them as references and you don't just straight up plagiarize somebody online. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy this lesson, and I'll see you in the next video. Today, we're going to be covering radial balance within the principles of design. While the elements of art are what artists use to make art, the principles of design are what artists use to make art pretty. Today, we're going to be covering the first principle of design, which is balance, because balance refers to how visually weighted an object is. You can imagine this kind of like a scale. For instance, if you have a large square on one half of the artwork, and then a tiny circle on the other half of the artwork, it's not going to be visually balanced because one side is going to look visually heavier than the other. There's actually 3 different types of balances, and we're going to be covering one of them today. Radial balance refers to something radiating from a center point. Imagine it like the radius of a circle. The point of the circle that starts at the center and goes outward to the edge of the circle. That is a radius. Radial balance is exactly the same thing, where it starts in the center of an artwork and radiates outward in all directions. For instance, a kaleidoscope. That would be an example of radial balance. Another example of radial balance that most people would be familiar with is a flower. It starts in the center point of the flower and the petals radiate outward from that. Your all's lesson for today, you are going to be creating your very own radial balance artwork. You will have the entire day to work on this, but you are not allowed to copy off each other. You are allowed to look up references online if you like, but those are references and they are not things for you to straight up plagiarize. Please make sure to make your own variation of whatever you're looking up if you decide to look something up. You will have the remainder of the day to make your very own artwork that shows radial balance. Thank you all very much. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, let me know. Today, we're going to be covering contrast within the principles of design. While the elements of art are what artists use to make art, the principles of design are what artists use to make art pretty. Contrast in art refers to how different things work together on a single surface. Or in other words, it is different things that are being represented in the same piece. Now, this could be anything from texture to color to pretty much any of the other principles or elements of art that we've covered up to this point. As an example, this is a very famous artwork by Andy Warhol, and it's in a series of artworks called Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was rated, and if I'm not mistaken, still is rated as being the most beautiful woman who ever lived. You can assume that she obviously did not wear her makeup like a clown. This is in direct contrast to how she would normally appear. There's also contrast in the color schemes. The purple and the yellow are what is known as a complementary color scheme, or in other words, they are opposite each other on the color wheel. This creates contrast whenever the viewer is looking at the artwork with the contrasting colors. Another way that you can have contrast is with texture. For instance, in Salvador Dali's The Persistence of Memory, also known as the melting clock more commonly, but in actuality that is a totally separate artwork altogether, there are several bits of contrast within this piece. The first one I want to look at is the contrast in the mountains versus the fleshy blob that is down on the center of the screen. The fleshy blob is actually a melted face, and you can see the eyelashes as well as a quivering eyebrow that's melted down into a nose, then goes down to a chin, and then over to a collarbone. Now, obviously that is in direct contrast to how we would normally perceive people to look, as well as the clocks being melted, also contrast there as well. Basically, contrast is different things with different properties being shown together on an artwork. For instance, a fluffy cloud next to a rocky mountain. That would be contrast. Your assignment for today, you are going to be creating your very own artwork that shows contrast. You are not allowed to copy off your neighbor. You are allowed to look up references online if you so choose to, but you are not allowed to copy those references. You are allowed to look at them for inspiration, but you are not allowed to plagiarize. If you have any questions, please let me know. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time. Today, we're going to be looking at emphasis in the principles of design. While the elements of art are what artists use to make art, the principles of design are what artists use to make art pretty. Emphasis is a fancy word that basically means, what are you looking at? So, what are you looking at?
It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. It's a banana.
And no, this is not Donald Trump. This was made long before Donald Trump. The emphasis in this artwork is the itty bitty tiny little face that's right in the middle of the big orange head, not Donald Trump. Emphasis is where your eye is looking, where the artist wants to drag your attention to. That is emphasis. And artworks can actually have more than one point of emphasis. For instance, this artwork I like to show as a way of introducing art meaning, but that's something for another video. This artwork actually has 2 points of emphasis. Can you determine where they are at? If you said the woman and the house, then you are correct. The artist puts emphasis on the house because of the position that the woman's body is in. You can see an implied line going from the woman's arm that is pointing you directly towards the house, as well as an implied emphasis or implied line based on where the woman is looking. As a viewer, we are used to looking at somebody and having somebody look back at us. However, we don't have that eye contact in this artwork. Instead, we imagine where her eyes are going to be and where they are looking. With her body position and the position of her head, you can see that she is looking at the house. Now that you know what emphasis is, where do you think the emphasis is at in this artwork? If you said the skull, then you are correct. In fact, there's lots of implied lines going on in this artwork. The black line directly underneath of it is an actual line that is pointing directly to the skull, as well as all the other lines around the skull that is dragging your eye downward to the black line, which then focuses your attention back up to the skull. Your assignment for today, you are going to be creating your very own artwork that shows emphasis. You are allowed to look up images online for reference. You are not allowed to copy your neighbor, and you're not allowed to directly copy what you see online. Remember, references are not plagiarism. You can use references as sources without directly stealing them. Thank you all very much. I hope that you have enjoyed this lesson, and I'll see you in the next video. Today, we're going to be covering movement within the principles of design. While the elements of art are what artists use to make art, the principles of design are what artists use to make art pretty. Movement is the path that your eye takes whenever it goes across an artwork. Now, this could be implied through an artwork actually moving or trying to imitate movement, or it could be how the artists make your eye track around a specific path by using either actual lines or implied lines, or by creating a sense of contrast that allows your eye to gradually transition across the artwork. As an example, I'm going to allow you to look at this artwork for a couple seconds. The reason why I gave you some time to look at this artwork is because no matter where you look at in this artwork, your eye is always going to be transported to the center. And now I'm always going to have somebody that says, but Mr. Gray, I was looking over here in this corner and it didn't. No. That is movement. That is your eye being gradually told what to do just by visual cues and implied lines that is dragging your eye in a spiral pattern into the center of the artwork. Another more historical example is the Great Wave. Your eye focuses in on one area specifically, and that is the wave. And then once you see the wave, you notice that the wave has movement and power that is curving up. The lines drag your eye up to the crest of the wave, and then your eye anticipates that something's going to happen. And you see those little fingers almost reaching out of the edge of the wave crest itself, like it's trying to grab at something, which makes your eye move down to where the wave is reaching, which is the ship. And that's when you realize, oh, there's boats on the water. That is movement and how your eye can move through an artwork. Your assignment today, you are going to be creating your very own artwork that shows movement. You are not allowed to copy off your neighbors. You are allowed to look up references online. However, you are not allowed to copy those references directly. Use them as a source. Do not use them to plagiarize. Thank you all very much. If you have any questions, let me know, and I hope this video was helpful. In this lesson, we're going to be covering rhythm in the principles of design. While the elements of art are what artists use to make art, the principles of design are what artists use to make art pretty. Rhythm is very similar to another principle of design we're going to look at later, which is pattern. Rhythm is when something happens at a specific time. Pattern, which we'll get to later, is something that always happens and just repeats over and over. Rhythm could be a pattern, but it doesn't have to be. Think about a sheet of music. It has certain notes that you have to hit right on cue. That's a tempo or a beat. A rhythm is exactly the same thing. Even though sheet music might have different notes, they have to hit those notes at a certain time. So it's not just a repeat of the same thing over and over again, as much as it is something that is going to happen at a specific time. And if you use your imagination, you would be able to determine where the next item would fall in that rhythm. This is an example of rhythm, where you can just imagine where the next color is going to be on the circle. You would know where the next ribbon is going to be. You are going to know where the next color transition is going to be. Everything in this is a rhythm. And it's the same way as this example of dancers. Yes, there's 3 different dancers there. However, they are placed in a way where if you were to continue the line, you would know where the next dancer would be placed. That is a rhythm. Your assignment for today is to create your very own artwork that has rhythm. You are allowed to look up references online. You are not allowed to copy your neighbor, and you are not allowed to directly copy the references that you see online. You can use those references as sources, but you are not allowed to directly plagiarize somebody else. Change it, make it your own, but do not directly copy. Thank you all very much. I hope that you enjoy this lesson, and I'll see you in the next video. Today, we will be covering pattern and the principles of design. While the elements of art are what artists use to make art, the principles of design are what artists use to make art pretty. We briefly mentioned pattern before whenever we talked about rhythm, how we said that rhythm could be in a pattern, but it didn't have to be. A rhythm is something that happens right on cue, and you can imagine where the next one is going to happen. A pattern, on the other hand, doesn't fall in that same category. A pattern is just the same thing repeated over and over and over and over again.
No, this is Patrick.
Is this the Krusty Krab?
No, this is Patrick.
Is this the Krusty Krab?
No, this is Patrick.
This is an example of pattern, and this is pattern using squares and rectangles. You can see that they're not in a rhythm. It doesn't have to be in a rhythm to be a pattern. You can just have the same thing being placed all over the place. You can also see that it's not the same color either. It's just the rectangles and squares is a pattern. Same thing with this MC Escher optical illusion. It is repetitive staircases. It's a pattern. A pattern is the same thing over and over and over again. Doesn't have to be in a rhythm, doesn't have to be in a specific order. It's just the same thing being shown over and over and over and over again. Today's lesson, you are going to be creating your very own artwork that shows pattern. You are free to look up references online and sources so you can create your artwork. You are not allowed to copy off your neighbor, and you are not allowed to plagiarize anything you see online. Looking up references is not directly copying them. Do not steal things you find online. Instead, use them for inspiration to be able to create your own artwork. Thank you all very much. I hope that you found this lesson helpful, and I'll see you in the next video. Today, we are going to be covering unity in the principles of design. While the elements of art are what artists use to make art, the principles of design are what artists use to make art pretty. Unity is the last principle of design, and it encompasses all of the other principles. And I'm not kidding, it really does.
Wow.
Unity is how two or more of the principles of design work together in an artwork. And believe it or not, unity is actually the easiest one to make because every artwork you ever make is probably going to have two principles of design in it without you even trying. But before we get into that, I want to show you a picture, and I want you to pause the video and look at this picture for a few seconds. Did you notice any principles of design in that image? Typically, I would take this time in class to point out a few of them and ask you and get some feedback back and forth, but I'm going to go ahead and show you where some of them are. The first one that I always point out is movement. If you count the horse's hooves in the foreground, you will see that there's actually 12 hooves. However, those are all coming off of one horse. So how could that be possible? The artist is imitating movement. So the artist is trying to show you how a horse would gallop, but in a snapshot for this picture. So it's giving the illusion that the horse is actually moving. There's contrast in all the different colors that are within the artwork, as well as pattern for the leaves falling and rhythm for the trees going along the top. Overall, the artwork is balanced, and it's balanced asymmetrically. There's also emphasis on the horse up front and the horse in the background. You see how this one artwork can encompass all of the principles of design if you're looking for it? And it's not just that artwork. Pretty much every artwork you look at will have unity. With Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night, you can see movement in the stars. You can see contrast between the blues and the yellows in the sky, emphasis on the tree in the foreground. And yes, that is a tree. We will cover that in a later video. You can also see rhythm and pattern in the houses in the background. There's so many different things going on that relates to the principles of design in this artwork and pretty much every artwork. Bob Ross was particularly good at creating unity in his work. He really loved to play with textures, as in his fluffy clouds or his rocky mountains. You can also see pattern and rhythm because every tree needs a friend, as Bob Ross would say. So there's rhythm in how he placed the trees and patterns as well. Now, because unity takes up so much of all the other principles, I'm going to be allowing you more time than I have on the other principles to work on your unity artwork. You will have the remainder of the week to work on an artwork that shows unity. Try and put your best foot forward on this. Put a lot of effort into it, because remember, I grade you based on work ethic. I don't grade you based on completing. So even if you get done, there's probably some more stuff that you can add to it. Thank you all very much. I hope this lesson was helpful. I'll see you in the next video.